Hello and welcome. This is episode 33 of the Wi-Fi Chats, the Wise Mind Fireside Chats. We're joined by Stacy Anderson, Gabby Sheshlock, and Erika Naidoo, some of our regulars and a very special guest. And the first thing that we're going to have a conversation about is respecting or disrespecting our elders. Respect for elders used to be an unquestioned societal value, but a little bit like empathy, it's becoming more conditional in modern times. I think there's reasons for this. I've got some ideas, but I would really like to hear from you. So, what are our thoughts, folks? Jump on in.
I've noticed how elderly people are demonised in this day and age because of the state of the planet. They've been blamed for the plastics and but when you hear about how the elderly people have got stories to tell, and it's amazing listening to them about how hard we would find living in their youths and how easy and how fun that they found it collecting for the coal fire, the logs, even the milkman coming round in the big milk churns. And you used to get jugs of milk out and use that. And I think it's given them the time, we could get such knowledge. If everything does go back to basics, that we've got the knowledge within us to carry on and thrive.
It's a really interesting point, Stacey, and it is one of the things that came to my mind is there's criticism of the state of the planet, but if you go back more than one generation, so to my grandparents' generations, it was so much more of a sustainable society. Glass bottles that used to be collected for recycling, your electric milk float that was kind of sustainable, battery driven, and actually most of our stuff didn't arrive pre-packaged in plastic and driven by a fuel consuming vehicle. You used to walk to the shops and you'd pick up your groceries in a paper bag. So it's a real fallacy. It's probably more our generation that had the boom in plastics. Fascinating, yeah, great point.
That's a great point. The madness about having everything packed in plastic, it's only, I think, for the last 15 years. I don't feel that old, but I still collected my milk from the farmer with the little milk can. So it's especially the mad plasticking, as I call it, like putting cucumbers in plastic and slicing an apple up in advance and put it in a plastic bag because people can't buy the apple anymore. Right? This is really, really recent. That some of the stuff isn't around longer than, say, 10 years. So that's an interesting point. I think for me, when I think about elders and what you said, Alec, there's two sides to it. We have lost the respect of elders, but respect has to be given, isn't it? It's just the way I see it, old people have become a burden because that's what they're talked about, isn't it? A burden on the finances, they're burdened because of the pensions, they're burdened to the health system. So they're just seen now often as a burden rather than there could be the wise person Stacey talked about with a lot of wisdom, with a lot of life experience who can actually give value to the younger generations. And I think you cannot just demand respect because that was often the problem in the old times, right? You had to respect your elders no matter what the elder was like, even if they weren't wise and they were cruel. It was demanded, right? And that's the other side. But it's this divide in society. And I live in Ireland, and when I moved here, I remember people were still talking to each other, the generations. You would be in a pub, and all generations were in the same pub, and a 20-year-old would talk to a 60-year-old. And this knowledge was still given on to the other person. And now, even now here in Ireland, you can't go to this pub because there's only the young people in it. And then there's the other pub where all the old people sit. Even there, this kind of divide has started. We're living like in these little bubbles, almost like age bubbles, and often don't have to cross fertilization anymore, if that makes sense.
It really does. What happened to respecting wisdom wherever it exists? And I guess that's the difference between authority and meritocracy. If you've got wise young people because they're fully up to speed with all the things that can and cannot be done with technology, which may or may not help the environmental situation, it can't be blind obedience to something like age. And in much the same way, people of an age should not dismiss younger minds who have got current wisdom.
I'm sitting here listening and trying to figure it all out. And when Alec first brought the topic to me about respecting the elders, I immediately went to parent-child relationship, right? I thought something had happened. So I was like, oh no, why are we talking about this? What happened? And then I'm listening to all of you, and I think I'm in agreement. I love old people. Let me just say that first and foremost. I love them. There's a special spot in my heart. I respect their experience and the fact that you have gotten to this point that I aspire to get to, and hope that I have the privilege to become an elder someday. So my patience is more open when it comes to older people. I respect their experience in the life that they have lived to get to where they are. So they get a pass from me automatically, usually, right? If I have a 90-year-old that tells me to fuck off, I'm like, yes, I get that. You have earned the right to tell everybody that if you feel like it based on your experience, no doubt. But when I'm listening to you speak, I'm thinking to when I was a kid, right? And I would have the parents telling me, go kiss Aunt so-and-so. And I remember feeling like, I don't want to. Like, why? I don't even know who that is. Why do I have to do that? So, but I understand that, right? It's like that you show the respect of you live long enough. I honor that. But I'm with Gabby and Alec, and it doesn't just come automatically. You give it to, you get it to give it, all of that kind of thing. I respect you, you respect me. It's a reciprocal kind of thing. Just because you're older than me doesn't automatically mean I'm going to respect you and what you're saying. I respect your journey to have reached where you are and your experience, but it doesn't automatically mean I'm going to respect you. There are people that are older than me that I don't have respect for, and that's fine. There are people younger than me that I have a huge amount of respect for. So it goes back and forth, and I always think of it as a parent, right? When you come at your kids with you're going to respect me, damn it, because I said so, that's a surefire way to get your kid to completely disrespect you. They are not going to just do that. You got to show them something to have respect in. So I think actions speak louder than words when it comes to respect. It doesn't automatically just get handed out.
Know somebody by their actions rather than their words is a great benchmark. And I think you've touched on things there like loss of family bonds, loss of community, because we tend to exist in these nuclear families now and only around you potentially people of age who are not of our family. And I guess, like you mentioned with children, we live in a very child oriented society, particularly in the West in this day and age. And that individualism is taking over from tradition. So the tradition of respecting one's elders, I'm thinking of the Baz Luhrmann song, respect your elders, that isn't quite as prevalent. And youngsters, and I'm not going to make a generalization of what age that is, but they don't necessarily have the experience, like Gabby was saying about, meeting somebody in a pub. They don't have the experience of meeting wise, friendly, mature old folk. What they get is the general kind of narrative in the press about old people being a burden, and you get this mindset going back to COVID. Can anybody believe COVID was 5 years ago? That actually maybe it wouldn't be too bad a thing if some of the old people died out. That's a very cynical, jaded approach to looking at the older generation.
It's really terrifying too when you have a kid who tells you you're old, right? Because perspective is everything. So it's like, well, wait a minute. That's not old. I remember being a kid and we had a neighbor, you guys know this, but she was a friend of mine because I love old people. I gravitate towards them because they have more to say. right? Like that, there's more for me to learn 9 out of 10 times from just the experience. So I was friends with her. And in my child mind, she was old, man. She was ancient in my 9-year-old little head. I'm thinking back now, she's probably 60. I'm like, oh my God, that's perspective for you. So what's old? That's a whole nother topic. What's old?
I come out of the end of the hippie area. And I don't know if you remember that, but in the hippie area, the saying was do not trust anyone over 30. And if I look back now, if I think about it, all my friends actually got into a real panic stage when they turned 30. They were okay when they were 40 and 50. The 30 was the one. And I wonder if that still was lingering because in the end of the fact, we got 30 and by the saying, we couldn't trust ourselves, isn't it? So, because it was seen as being really old when I was 16. But it's an interesting one. But coming back to Alec, actually, I'm working now with school classes. And one thing I get with all the school classes, it's like a little red thread. They all say they don't like to talk to strangers, and especially older adults. They said we don't know how to talk to them because they never have. Because of this nucleus of you have the family, you probably live really far away from grandparents because parents had to move before because of work, all those things happening. And they have the kids, they have the parents of their friends, which they're all the same, kind of around the same age. So they don't know how to talk to strangers and older people. They have never done it. And they're actually a bit nervous about it.
I was just thinking about your first comment about not trusting people over 30. And I was thinking, well, where else is this in pop culture? Do you remember the movie Logan's Run? Whole point of Logan's Run was that when you reached 30, you were terminated. There was this big ceremony and the people went up and it was like, oh, they're elevating, subliming. No, they were being terminated because they didn't want people over 30. And in the movie, they find an old man. He's been living on his own for decades and he is cantankerous. He talks to himself, and it's like a comedy element of the movie. But I can see so clearly that disconnect of how do we communicate. It's almost like it's a different species.
Speaking of that, it's the day and age that we live in is youth rules. And it doesn't matter how old you are, you're getting procedures done to keep you looking as young as possible. So everything young is what people want to see. So I've often wondered if elderly people actually scare middle-aged people because it's inevitable that this is what's going to happen. So they just turn a blind eye. They don't want to recognise it. They don't want to register with it or anything like that. Now, it goes back to the stories that they tell. I've seen me standing outside the shop waiting on my mum, and this elderly lady would come over, and I would get her full story. She's on about she lives on her own, her husband's died, her kids have moved away, and she's got nobody around her. And before she left, she just went, "Thanks for listening." And I thought that's all these people want. They just want somebody to listen, somebody just to acknowledge that they're there, because there's different layers of elderly. There's the ones who are craving the connection, but there's ones who assert their dominance. I'm older than you, so you need to listen to me. They make themselves the hierarchy of the family or the matriarchy of the family. And even though that connection isn't there, that can also bring up resentment for elderly people if that's the type of attitude that's being thrown at them. So this whole thing that, God, women are near enough known as obsolete by the time they hit 35. You can't have kids, you can't start a new career, you can't do that. So being young is hammered into children that this is where you're going to live the prime of your life. But I've also heard that the second chapter is the best. So it's bringing that into focus as well.
Oh, sorry, Gab, go ahead.
Just a quick one, Stacy. It just hit me when you said everything is geared to looking as young as possible because we avoid the subject of death and getting old, right? I just realized even the computer if you look at me, I met me in person, that my hair is actually in real life far more grey than right now. I just realized that. And I have no filter on, right? There's no filter on. So the computer automatically picks out the dark hair I still have and it blends out the grey hair. And I didn't even ask for it. It's just built in. It just hit me.
I'm waiting for it to take the 40 pounds I want it to take away from me. It's not doing that yet, but I'm waiting. We're talking about, I feel like there's a couple different topics in here that we could really talk about. The elderly and their role in society really is one thing. But since we started with respect, I don't know if it's respect your elders. I don't think respect exists anywhere anymore. Respect has just, even self-respect, it's gone out the window. I think we need a reboot and a regroup into what respect is for yourself, for others, for the world, whatever. It seems to be an obsolete concept here that nobody respects anybody anymore. I don't know. Do you guys find that? I don't think it just stops with the elderly. It's just peer-to-peer respect has gone out the window. I think it starts with self-respect. Honestly, I think that that's obviously the first layer. If you have no sense of respect for yourself, how do you know how to hold yourself and offer it to somebody else?
I think you might have a point, and it starts very small. Before respect is also being polite to other people and polite to other people we don't know. And what really took me back a couple of years ago, people in Ireland are still very polite. They leave the bus and they say thank you to the bus driver, right? They hold people's door open and they're really kind and they help each other, especially where I live. They really help each other. And I heard people in Ireland discussing that Irish people are too friendly and too polite and they shouldn't do those things. And why do we say thank you to bus driver? This is old-fashioned and all that. And there was a big debate about it. And I was sitting back at the time and I said, but why? It makes life really nice. You come home, you had a nice chat with a stranger and because they held the door open and you got in a 2-minute little nice chat and it makes it nice. It makes Ireland so lovely to live in. And I said, why are you questioning that in the first place? Right.
Yeah, I would love to know, why do you want to not say thank you? I don't understand. What is that costing? Talk about counting the cost. What does it cost you to say thank you to somebody who holds a door open? What is that? I just don't understand what that means.
One of my friends was on a local bus, and sometimes the bus drivers, when elderly people go on, they'll wait till the elderly sat down before they move off. But you get the impatient drivers that just move off. Well, this driver did this one time. It was an elderly woman and she stumbled and she nearly fell. And my friend caught her arm and asked her if she was okay. And the elderly woman looked at her and went, "Get your hands off me." And she just went, "Well, I know I did the right thing." So where does this culture come from? Growing old, I know, isn't the best. And we don't want to grow old. And there's a thing that I've seen, and it kind of speaks truth. It's when you realise how old you are. If you fall in the town and people laugh, you're still young. But if you fall in town and people run to your aid, it means you're old. So when people start running to your aid, it's like, oh my God, is that how old I am? So it could be just a realisation to these people that I'm okay, I'm fine, but it's just come out in a wrong way, but they're just dealing with it in their own way. They're not out to be nasty. They're just trying to deal with getting old in their own way.
I think there's an element of the pace of life. Elderly people, they can be a bit slow in the supermarket. They take more time. They want to look and decide, am I having this pack of something or that pack of something? And there's an inherent disrespect in the puffing and puffing and trying to get past them attitude. Life, this must be productive at any cost. Lots of things to achieve and got to get them done by the end of the day. And this not necessarily only applies to old people, it could apply to people who are differently abled. I certainly had a very unpleasant experience when I was still wheelchair bound of going into town. The bus ride was absolutely horrendous, nightmare, being wheeled around the shops. Everything was against being in a wheelchair. And the number of tuts and people going round a different way so that they didn't have to wait for the wheelchair to go through. I've seen this also with young mums with kids in pushchairs. So I think there's an element of what Erika was saying, that there's just a general lack of respect. But there's also, I guess there is the individualization of, I have stuff to do and you are in my way mentality.
It's a selfish, rude kind of, this is my world and I don't care what goes on around me. I have to do what I have to do. As far as that Stacy story, there are cranky old people. Let's get real. According to my kid, I could be a cranky old person, right? I'm old. And when I'm cranky, I'm a cranky old person. So it happens. When I'm in presence of that, a couple things happen for me. I take the perspective of, I wonder what this person was like as a young person. Is this just part of their makeup? Is this how they react? Or, and I'm going to say it, there's the grief of aging. The aging process can bring some real grief with it. It's a loss of a sense of dignity. It's coming to the realization my limitations have changed, all of that. It's just perspective, right? It's just being aware of all of that. And Stacy, you said nobody wants to grow old. And I'm sitting here thinking, no, I do. I want to grow old. I want to get to that, have the privilege of being here long enough to be able to say, I'm still alive. I want to be able to, I don't want to get old. There's a difference for me. Growing old and getting old, two different things. I don't want to get old. I want to grow old though, and be able to share some wisdom with whoever wants to listen to it.
I love that. There's a difference between growing old and getting old. And when it comes to elderly people, sometimes just giving them the time instead of rushing them, instead of going tutting behind them and, oh, for God's sake, just give them the time. But life goes at 100 miles an hour now, and if we blink, we might miss something. So anything that's slower than we are, we get so impatient, we get frustrated, and just give them the time. They've done their time doing everything that we're doing. They're slowing down. Just let them be them. Stop trying to drag them up to our pace. Just let them be and enjoy them as well, especially family, friends. Enjoy them when they're here because they've got some really, really gold nuggets that they can teach you.
I can't remember which country it is. I think it's one of the Scandinavian countries. I think it's Sweden. They actually introduced in supermarkets the slow lane. And it's for older people to go slow and also have enough time to may have a chat with the cashier about the weather, whatever, because it's probably the only chat they have at a day. I think that's lovely. And really, closing day thoughts, that's a closing thought for me. Have understanding for each other, seek the conversation with each other, learn from each other, look for the wisdom. And anyone who thinks, I don't care about respect, you will get old one day. And if you don't, as a wise friend of mine once said, if you don't want to get old, die early.
That's what I was just thinking. My closing thoughts before were, I wish us all the privilege of getting old, right? I wish it all for all of us, because the alternative is to not. And nobody wants that too soon. So for everyone out there, I hope you're lucky enough and fortunate enough to grow old. And just remember, when you get there, karma's a bitch. So do what you need to do now and respect and have some perspective and awareness of who you're spending time with.
That was my closing thought. It's we're going to be elderly ourselves and our kids are going to be elderly. So how we treat elders and how we show our kids how to treat elders is how they're going to be treated when they're elders. So what goes round comes round. So yes.
I guess my closing thought is we can act old even though we're physically young. We can grow old, but mentally remain young and positive at heart. And if the mindset stays fluid, flexible, then there's no reason why we shouldn't embrace changes and continue to act fully engaged with our lives. So, as always, the contact details of everybody that's talking to you today can be found in the comments. And I hope to see you again soon at the next Wi-Fi chat. Bye.